I've been invisible my whole life. That was the plan. That was the safety net. So why, the one morning I decide to exist, does the most dangerous alpha in Seattle look at me like I just shattered something inside him? The coffee was burning my fingers through the paper cup. The sidewalk was loud, wet from last night's rain, and I was already 3 minutes late to a job I needed more than air. I wasn't supposed to be noticed. I never was. Then his eyes found mine, and the whole world went quiet. My name is Seo Jiwon, 24 years old, Omega, and the single most invisible person in any room I walk into by choice. I'm not small, not fragile, not the kind of Omega people write songs about. I'm the kind who shows up early, works late, keeps his head down, and goes home to a studio apartment that smells like instant ramen and old paperbacks. I don't wear my designation like a wound. I wear it like a coat I chose, practical, mine, and nobody's business. Seattle had been good to me that way. A city full of people too busy moving to stop and stare. I'd transferred here 8 months ago from Portland, chasing a junior architect position at Hanul Design Group, a mid-sized firm quietly making noise in the Pacific Northwest. The pay was decent. The work was real. And most importantly, my boss, a round-faced beta named Mr. Choi Byung-go, never once asked about my biology. I liked that. I liked being a person before I was a designation. But some mornings the city forgets to cooperate. This was one of those mornings. I'd overslept by 11 minutes, a catastrophe by my standards. I'd skipped my usual bus, cut through the glass corridor between 5th and Madison, and was power walking in the rain with coffee in one hand and my portfolio tube under my arm when the collision happened. Not a dramatic crash, just a shoulder. A hard, solid, immovable shoulder that stopped me mid-stride like I'd walked into a wall. I stumbled. The coffee lid popped. A splash of dark roast hit my sleeve, my wrist, and the edge of someone's impossibly white dress shirt. "I'm so sorry," I said immediately, already reaching for the napkin stuffed in my coat pocket. I didn't see you, I'm sorry." I looked up, and then I stopped talking. He was tall. That was the first thing. Tall in a way that felt structural, like buildings are tall, not decorative, just fundamental. Dark hair, cut clean. A jaw that looked carved rather than grown. And eyes sharp, black, and utterly still, staring down at me with an expression I couldn't name. Not anger, not surprise, something worse. Recognition, which made zero sense because I had never seen this man before in my life. His scent hit me half a second later, and I actually flinched. Not because it was unpleasant, God, no. It was the opposite. Pine resin and cold stone and something underneath, something warm and low, like embers that hadn't gone out. Alpha, unmistakably. The kind of alpha scent that didn't ask permission to enter a room. Back up, back up. You don't know this person. I took one step back and straightened my spine. The napkins were already useless. The stain had spread across his cuff in a pale brown bloom. 2 men in dark suits stood flanking him, 3 feet back, watching me the way people watch something unpredictable. I didn't care. "I apologize for the shirt," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'll cover the dry cleaning." He still hadn't spoken. His eyes hadn't moved. Why isn't he speaking? "Sir." One of the suited men stepped forward with a face like a closed door. "Mr. Yoon has a schedule." Yoon. The name landed in my chest before my brain caught up. Yoon Jihyun, CEO of Chongma Holdings, the largest private development firm on the West Coast and, as of 3 weeks ago, the parent company that had just quietly acquired Hanul Design Group. My firm. My job. I looked back at the man in front of me. He was still watching me. Still silent. And something in his expression had shifted barely, like a single crack in stone, to something I had no framework for. "Jiwon SSI, he said. My blood went cold. He knew my name. I had never met this man. I had never spoken to him, emailed him, or existed anywhere near his orbit. I was a junior architect in a firm his company had purchased 30 days ago. A name on a staff list. A nobody. So why did Yoon Jihyun, the coldest alpha in Seattle, say my name like he'd been holding it a long time? I wasn't supposed to be seen. That was the whole point. So why did it feel like he'd already been looking? He knew my name. Not "excuse me" or "hey you," or the classic alpha move of just staring until the lesser designation gets uncomfortable and leaves. No, he said my name. The full version. Formal. Precise. Like it had been sitting in his mouth, waiting. I did what any reasonable, self-respecting Omega would do in this situation. I laughed. Not a big laugh. A short, sharp, slightly unhinged sound that escaped before I could catch it. The suited man to Yoon Jihyun's left blinked. The one on the right shifted his weight. Yoon himself didn't move. "I'm sorry," I said, pressing my lips together. "Did you just say my name?" "Yes." One word. Flat. Certain. Like gravity. "Okay. So we're doing this." I adjusted the portfolio tube under my arm, took one calm breath, and looked up at him directly. He had about 4 inches on me, which under normal circumstances would feel intimidating. These were not normal circumstances, and I was not in the mood. "We've never met," I said. "No. You own the company that bought my firm." "Yes. And you know my name because—" He didn't answer immediately. That pause, barely 2 seconds, was the most unsettling thing that had happened to me all morning, and I had already spilled hot coffee on a billionaire. "Your portfolio was included in the acquisition review," he said finally. I read it. He read it. I stared at him. "You personally read junior staff portfolios." "I read everything." "That's either very impressive or deeply concerning," I said. "I haven't decided which." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. More like the memory of one, surfacing briefly and then submerging again before it could be identified. The suited man cleared his throat. "Mr. Yoon, the Chongma Tower meeting begins in 14 minutes. Yoon didn't look at him. He was still looking at me with that same unreadable stillness, like I was a blueprint he was trying to understand. I was starting to feel like a specimen, which I did not appreciate. "The Chongma Tower," I repeated, because my mouth apparently had opinions before my brain approved them. "That's the mixed-use development proposal on 6th. The one with the structural courtyard problem your current design team hasn't solved yet." The suited man's expression finally cracked. Slightly. Into something between offense and alarm. Yoon's eyes sharpened. "You've reviewed the proposal," he said. "It wasn't a question. It's public record. The permit application was filed last month." I shifted the portfolio tube to my other arm. "Your load distribution on the east wing doesn't account for the slope variance on that block. It'll cause drainage issues in winter. Seattle winters are not gentle." Silence. Maybe I should have just said sorry about the shirt and walked away. But I didn't, because I was right, and being right is the only luxury I allow myself. The rain had softened to a mist, the kind that doesn't fall so much as hover. The glass corridor around us was filling with morning foot traffic. Umbrellas folding, coffee cups steaming, the low ambient noise of a city getting to work. But inside this small circle of sidewalk, everything felt strangely suspended. His scent was doing something irritating. I'm not dramatic about alpha scents. I've worked with alphas my whole adult life, and I know how to breathe through my mouth, keep my scent blockers topped up, and not make it anyone's problem. But Yoon Jihyun's scent was not behaving like a normal alpha scent. It wasn't aggressive or territorial. It was just present, settled, like it belonged in whatever room it entered, like it was already comfortable in my personal space, which it had not been invited into. "Focus. You're going to be late." "I should go," I said, and took a step sideways to move around him. "The position is yours if you want it." I stopped, turned. "I'm sorry. Design lead on the Chongma Tower project." His voice carried no inflection, no sales pitch, no warmth. Just fact delivered like weather. "The role has been open for 6 weeks. Your firm's acquisition transferred your contract to Chongma Holdings as of this morning. You're already our employee." I felt the blood leave my face and then rush back in. "As of this morning," I repeated slowly. "Yes. You made me a Chongma employee this morning. Technically at 8 a.m. I checked my watch. It was 8:23. He restructured my employment contract before I'd finished my coffee. "With respect," I said, And I used my very careful voice, the one that sounds polite but means the opposite. You can't just reassign someone without their input. That's not how employment works. The contract allows for internal transfers during acquisition periods. The contract, I said, that I signed with Hanul Design Group, not with you. We're the same entity now. You are not the same entity as the firm I chose to work for. I took one step closer, because apparently my survival instincts had taken the morning off. I'm a person, not a line item in your acquisition paperwork. Something shifted in his expression then. Not offense, not irritation, something quieter. Something almost like attention, real attention, the kind that actually lands. I know, he said, 2 words. And for some reason they hit completely differently than everything else he'd said. Don't let that land. He's a CEO who read your portfolio and reshuffled your contract before breakfast. This is not a green flag moment, Jihyun. I want to see the structural reports before I agree to anything, I said. They'll be on your desk by 9. I haven't said yes. No, he said. But you will. The audacity. The sheer, breathtaking, silk-voiced audacity. I laughed again, that same short, startled sound. You're very sure of yourself. I'm sure of the work, he said. I read your portfolio, Jihyun SSI. All of it. Twice. The mist was picking up again. Somewhere behind me, a bus hissed to a stop. The morning kept moving around us, indifferent and loud, but I was standing completely still on a wet Seattle sidewalk, staring at a man who had apparently rearranged my professional life before sunrise and then memorized my design work well enough to say it with that kind of certainty. He read it twice. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know what to do with any of this. The name he shouldn't have known, the job I hadn't applied for, the scent that kept sitting warm at the edge of my senses like it had no intention of leaving. But what I did know with complete and irritating clarity was this. Yoon Jihyun was not looking at me like I was a junior architect he'd plucked from a staff list. He was looking at me like I was something he'd already decided on. And no one, alpha, beta, or otherwise, gets to decide anything about Seo Jiwon. Not without a fight. I held on to that thought like a hand grip on a moving train as I walked the remaining 4 blocks to Chongma Tower. The mist had made up its mind and graduated to actual rain by the time I pushed through the revolving glass doors, and I was damp at the shoulders and still mildly furious, which I think is a completely reasonable emotional state for someone whose entire employment situation had been rearranged before 8:30 in the morning. The lobby was enormous. Marble floors the color of pale ash. Ceilings that climbed 3 stories before hitting a grid of skylights currently doing nothing useful in the rain. A reception desk curved across the far wall like a crescent, staffed by 2 betas in matching charcoal uniforms who looked up when I walked in with the synchronized precision of people who had been trained to do exactly that. I approached the desk before they could ask. Seo Jiwon, I said. Design lead, Chongma Tower project. Apparently as of 8 a.m. today, though nobody asked me. The beta on the left, name tag reading Jim Suyin, blinked once and then checked her screen. Her expression didn't flicker. Yes, Mr. Seo. Your access card and floor assignment are ready. You've been placed on the 14th floor with the primary development team. Of course I have, I said pleasantly. She handed me a sleek black keycard and a folded paper with a 4-digit code. Mr. Yoon's assistant will meet you upstairs to walk you through the handover. The structural reports you requested have already been uploaded to your project portal. I paused. I requested those 11 minutes ago. On a sidewalk. Yes, Mr. Seo. This man runs a terrifyingly efficient operation and I refuse to be impressed. Great, I said. Thank you. The 14th floor smelled like fresh paint and ambition. Open plan. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gray stretch of Elliott Bay. Drafting stations arranged in clean rows with the kind of intentional minimalism that costs a lot of money to achieve. A handful of people were already at their stations, heads down, screens bright, the low hum of a team mid-project. They all looked up when I walked in. I was used to that. Being the new person had a specific texture to it, the scan, the assessment, the invisible recalibration of the room's social geometry. I'd done it enough times to walk through it without flinching. I gave the room a single nod. found an empty station near the windows with my name already on a small placard, and sat down. My name on a placard. He had my name on a placard. I set my portfolio tube on the desk, pulled off my damp coat, and opened the project portal on the monitor. The structural reports were there, as promised, 6 documents, each one dense with load calculations, soil surveys, and engineering notes flagged in red at 3 separate junctions. I found the east wing drainage issue within 4 minutes. It was worse than I'd thought from the public filing. The slope variance wasn't just a winter drainage problem. It was a foundational miscalculation that would compromise the entire courtyard structure within 7 years. Whoever had signed off on this had either been careless or in a significant hurry. Or both. You found it already. I turned. The man standing at the edge of my station was not Yoon Jihyun, which was either a relief or a disappointment. I was not examining that too closely. He was younger, late 20s, with an open face and the kind of bright, curious energy that immediately suggested beta. He was holding 2 coffee cups and wearing an expression of genuine delight, like watching someone solve a puzzle he'd been stuck on. Han Juno, he said, offering one of the cups. Assistant to Mr. Yoon. And unofficially, the only person on this floor who will tell you the truth without checking with legal first. I took the coffee. How long has the East Wing problem been flagged internally? Juno's smile stayed warm, but something behind his eyes adjusted. 3 months. And nobody fixed it. Nobody could agree on the fix without reopening the foundation permits, which would delay the project timeline by 4 months. He pulled a chair from the neighboring station and sat down uninvited, which I respected. The previous design lead quit over it. The one before that was reassigned. I looked at him. How many design leads has this project had? You're the 4th. Of course I am. Outside the windows, Seattle was doing what Seattle does in October, layering gray over gray with artistic commitment. The bay was a flat, pewter sheet below. Container ships moved slowly in the distance like punctuation marks in a sentence that hadn't ended yet. I wrapped both hands around the coffee cup, proper coffee this time, not the destroyed one from this morning, and let the warmth work through my fingers while I thought. The scent on this floor was neutral, filtered, the kind of climate-controlled corporate air that stripped out most biological markers. I topped up my scent blockers in the elevator, habit more than necessity. My designation was my own business and I intended to keep it that way, especially walking into a new team dynamic I hadn't chosen. But underneath the filtered air, faint and distant from somewhere higher in the building, I caught it again. Pine resin, cold stone, that low, banked warmth. He's in the building. I took a slow breath and returned my eyes to the screen. The fix is possible without reopening the foundation permits, I said. You redistribute the load across 3 anchor points instead of 2, regrade the courtyard slope by 4 degrees, and install a subsurface channel along the east perimeter. It adds 6 weeks to the timeline, not 4 months. Juno stared at me. I've been here 20 minutes, I added. I know, he said. That's why Mr. Yoon hired you. Mr. Yoon didn't hire me, I said carefully. Mr. Yoon acquired the firm I already worked for and then reassigned me without a conversation. Those are very different things. Juno had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. He did want to speak with you directly. The sidewalk meeting this morning was planned. I set the coffee cup down. Planned. He knew your route. You take the same path from the 3rd Avenue bus stop every morning. The silence that followed that sentence was very loud. He knew my route, I said. He reviews everything before making decisions. Personnel included. Juno said it gently like that made it better. It's not. He's not strange about it. He just prepares. Han Juno, I said, keeping my voice very even. That man learned my commute route, read my portfolio twice, had my nameplate made before I agreed to work here, and restructured my contract at 8 a.m. this morning. I paused. At what point in that sentence does it stop sounding like preparation and start sounding like something I should report to someone? Juno opened his mouth, closed it. Then, to his credit, he laughed. A real one surprised out of him. When you say it like that, I say it like that because that's what it is. He respects your work, Juno said, and his voice had dropped slightly, gone quieter and more honest. I've worked for Yoon Jihyun for 4 years. I have never seen him read a junior staff portfolio. I have never seen him personally intercept a new employee on a sidewalk. I have never, he paused, seen him remember someone's name before a meeting. Something about the way he said that last part made me go still. What do you mean, remember someone's name before a meeting? Juno looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't fully decode. Careful. A little weighted. Mr. Yoon has a condition, he said slowly. Prosopagnosia. Face blindness. He doesn't recognize people by their appearance. He works around it, has for years, but it means that when he meets someone new, he relies on context, voice, file associations. He paused again. He knew your name on that sidewalk because he'd studied your file enough that your voice matched the professional profile he'd built. I stared at him. He built a profile, I said, of my voice, of your work. Your voice was secondary. Sure, the voice was secondary. Very normal. Completely standard corporate behavior. I turned back to the screen. The structural reports were still open. Red flags scattered across the east wing like small fires. Outside, the rain pressed quietly against the glass. My coffee was going warm in my hands and my brain was doing something uncomfortable. Rearranging information, recontextualizing a morning that had already been strange enough. A man who couldn't recognize faces had recognized me. Not by my face. By everything else. By the work I'd done in a firm he'd acquired. By a voice he'd apparently cataloged against a professional file. By a name he'd held with a certainty that had nothing to do with sight. Why does that feel like the most unsettling and the most human thing anyone has ever done in my direction? Stop. Stop that immediately. I clicked open the second structural report. And that was when the elevator at the far end of the floor opened, and Yoon Jihyun walked in, and every single person on the 14th floor went very, very quiet. He wasn't looking at them. He was already looking toward my station. Not at my face. I understood that now with a weight I hadn't expected. At the space I occupied. At the shape of me in the room he'd built for me to walk into. And somehow that was worse. Because it meant he always knew exactly where I was. I kept my eyes on the screen. This was a conscious, deliberate, extremely mature decision. I was a professional. I was here to solve a foundational engineering problem that 3 other people had failed to crack. I was not here to have feelings about a CEO who had apparently built a sensory map of my existence before I'd agreed to be in the same building as him. I heard his footsteps cross the floor. Measured. Unhurried. The room stayed quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet when the person with the most authority enters. Not fearful silence, more like collective breath-holding. The kind of quiet that had been practiced. Juno, still sitting beside me, straightened slightly without making it obvious. Points to him for subtlety. The footsteps stopped at my station. I finished reading the sentence I was on, load tolerance specifications for the anchor points, genuinely interesting, very grounding, and then I looked up. Yoon Jihyun in a lobby was striking. Yoon Jihyun 14 floors up, in a room that was functionally his, with rain-gray light coming through floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, was something else entirely. The white shirt from this morning had been replaced. No coffee stains, a different cut, charcoal this time. He stood with the particular stillness of someone who had learned to be very precise about where he placed himself in a room. Because he has to be, I thought, and immediately wished I hadn't. Humanizing him was not on my agenda. You've reviewed the East Wing reports, he said. Good morning to you too, I said. A beat of silence. Juno made a sound that was almost a cough. Good morning, Yoon said. And the words came out careful and slightly delayed, like he was locating them. You've reviewed the East Wing reports. Yes. I turned the monitor slightly so the flagged sections were visible from where he stood. Your load distribution problem has a fix that doesn't require reopening the foundation permits. 6-week delay instead of 4 months. I can have a full proposal by end of week. By tomorrow. I looked at him. By end of week. Good structural work doesn't get faster because someone wants it to. The corner of his mouth did that thing again. The almost movement. The ghost of something that hadn't fully committed to existing. End of week, he said, not agreeing, not arguing, just repeating it like he was filing it somewhere. Was there something else? I asked. Because I do have 6 documents left to review and a proposal to begin, and I work better without an audience. Behind me, I heard someone at another station inhale sharply. Someone else shifted in their chair. I got the distinct impression that people did not speak to Yoon Jihyun this way as a general rule. He didn't look offended. He looked, if anything, more focused. Walk with me, he said. I just sat down. There's something you need to see on the 16th floor. Can Juno show me? No. I held his gaze for a moment. He didn't shift, didn't soften, didn't perform patience. He just waited with that architectural stillness of his, and I had the uncomfortable realization that he would simply continue waiting indefinitely, which was somehow more effective than any pressure. Fine. 5 minutes, I said and stood up. The 16th floor was different from the 14th. Where 14 was populated and humming with project energy, 16 was quieter. A model room, I realized as we entered. Long tables running the length of the space, and on them the physical scale model of the Changma Tower project in extraordinary detail. Every block, every courtyard angle, every proposed green space rendered in precise miniature under warm overhead lighting that made the whole thing glow amber and gold against the gray window backdrop. It was, despite everything, genuinely beautiful. I moved closer before I meant to. The east wing was immediately identifiable, the courtyard section, the problematic slope rendered faithfully in the model's terrain, the 2 anchor points that were never going to carry the weight assigned to them long term. You see it, Yoon said from behind me. Not a question. I saw it in the reports. I leaned over the model, tracing the perimeter line with my eyes. But seeing it physically, yeah, it's worse in person. The grade change is steeper than the survey numbers feel on paper. The previous design leads all proposed permit reopening. Because they were solving for the symptom, I said, not the cause. I straightened and turned around. He was closer than I expected. Not uncomfortably close, but close enough that his scent registered again. Pine, cold stone, that quietly persistent warmth underneath. I stepped to the side naturally, putting the corner of the model table between us, and watched him track the movement with his head rather than his eyes. He's listening for me, I realized, not watching. Something about that landed strangely in my chest. Quietly, without permission. Absolutely not. The cause is the site itself, I continued, keeping my voice professional and even. Whoever approved the original build location either didn't review the topographic survey thoroughly or reviewed it and decided the timeline mattered more than the foundation. Either way, that's a decision that was made before I got here, and it's not my problem to judge. My problem is solving it. Why did you take the Portland position? He asked. I blinked. What? Before Hanul. You had an offer from a firm in Chicago. Larger. Better compensation. You turned it down. The silence stretched a beat too long. You read my employment history, I said. I told you. I read everything. That's a personal decision that has nothing to do with the Changma project, I said. I'm not asking about the project. Then what are you asking about? He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain had picked up again, running in thin rivers down the tall windows, and the sound of it filled the space between us. Soft, constant, patient. You're good enough for Chicago, he said. You were good enough 2 years ago. You chose smaller, quieter, further away. A pause. I want to understand the logic. I studied him. Why? Because I make decisions based on complete information. And you're incomplete. The audacity again. Fresh delivery, same breathtaking nerve. Yoon Jihyun, I said, and I used his full name deliberately, watched the slight adjustment in his posture when I did. I am not a structural report. You don't get to flag the sections you don't understand and demand I explain them. I'm not demanding. His voice was even. I'm asking. You don't ask like a normal person. You ask like someone who is used to the answer arriving automatically. Something shifted in his face then. Not offense. Something more interior than that. A small, brief rearrangement around the eyes that disappeared almost before it arrived. "You're right," he said. "I had not expected that. I'm aware that I don't ask well," he continued, and his voice had lost its boardroom cadence, gone flatter and more honest. "I'm told it sounds like commands. I don't always know where the line is." I looked at him for a long moment. The model tower glowed between us. Rain on glass. The distant sound of the 14th floor through the ceiling. The low hum of a building working. Portland was smaller and quieter and further away, I said finally, because I needed it to be. That's the complete information. He absorbed that without pushing it. "Okay," he said, "just that. Okay. No follow-up, no extraction, no filing it away visibly for later use. Just acceptance, clean and immediate. That was unexpected. Don't make it mean something." I looked back at the model. "I need to get back to the reports. There's one more thing." I turned. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced a folded document. He held it out in my direction, not quite at me, slightly to my left, and I realized he was placing it in the space he calculated I occupied, offering it without certainty of exactly where my hand was. I took it. It was a contract amendment. My name at the top. New title, Design Lead, Structural Development. Compensation that made me go very still for 3 full seconds. "You had this prepared," I said. "Last week. Before you knew if I'd agree." "I knew." I folded the contract and held it against my side. My pulse was doing something I was choosing not to examine. The room was warm from the model lighting, and I was suddenly very aware of how quiet the 16th floor was, how completely removed from the 14th floor sounds, how it was just the two of us and a miniature version of a building we were apparently going to fix together, whether I had fully agreed to that yet or not. "You keep saying that," I said. "That you knew." "Because I did. Based on a portfolio and a voice profile and my commute route. Based on your work," he said. "The rest was context." I looked down at the folded contract in my hand, then back up at him. He was watching the space I occupied with that precise, careful attention, and I had the sudden, deeply inconvenient thought that being truly seen by someone who couldn't see faces might be the most thorough kind of being seen there was. "Don't. Jihyun, I am begging you. I'll review it," I said. "I'm not signing anything today. End of week," he said, and the ghost of that almost smile was back. He'd borrowed my own words and thrown them back at me like a gift. I turned and walked toward the elevator before my face could do anything embarrassing. But halfway across the floor, I stopped. Because on the model table, tucked beneath the East Wing section I'd been studying, was a second document I hadn't noticed before. A single sheet. And at the top, in clean printed type, was not an engineering note. It was a name. My name. And beneath it, a date 14 months ago. 7 months before Changma had ever approached Hanul Design Group. He'd known about me for 14 months. This was never about the building. I picked up the document. My hands were steady. I want to be clear about that. My hands were completely steady because I am Seo Jiwon and I do not tremble over pieces of paper. Even pieces of paper that suggest a man I met this morning has been tracking my professional existence for over a year. My hands were steady. My breathing, however, was doing something slightly irregular that I was going to blame on the elevation. I turned around. Yoon Jihyun had not moved toward the elevator. He was still standing at the far end of the model table, his posture unchanged, his attention oriented toward the space I occupied with that careful, calibrated precision that I was beginning to recognize as his version of eye contact. I walked back across the room and placed the document on the table between us. 14 months, I said. He looked at the table, then back toward me. Yes, my name, dated 14 months ago. 7 months before your company made any move toward Hanul Design Group. I kept my voice level, calm. The kind of calm that lives right next to something much less calm. That's not a personnel file from an acquisition, Yoon Jihyun. That predates the acquisition by more than half a year. Yes. So I need you to explain that to me right now. He was quiet for long enough that I started to wonder if he was going to explain it at all. The rain on the windows had thickened again. The model tower glowed between us, patient and miniature and indifferent. 18 months ago, he said, I attended a structural engineering symposium in Portland. Industry event. I don't attend many of them. The social geometry is difficult for me to navigate without visual recognition. I went because the keynote was on subsurface load distribution in urban slope environments. A brief pause. A topic relevant to a problem I'd been trying to solve for 2 years. I said nothing. I let him continue. There was a Q&A session after the keynote. Someone in the audience asked a question that reframed the entire panel discussion. One question. 4 sentences. He paused again. The answer the questioner proposed was better than anything the keynote speaker had presented. More elegant. More practical. And it was delivered by someone who didn't stand up to ask it. Didn't give a name. Just spoke from their seat and then went quiet again. Something cold moved through me. I couldn't see who it was, he said. I heard the voice. I heard the 4 sentences. I spent the next 6 weeks trying to find the person they belonged to. The room was very still. That was me, I said, even though I already knew. The symposium registration list had 47 attendees. I cross-referenced every profile against the voice pattern I remembered and the professional specialization implied by the question. A pause. It took 6 weeks. Your name was the one that fit. I stared at him. You cross-referenced 47 people? I said slowly. Based on a voice you heard once. A voice and 4 sentences about subsurface load distribution. That is... I stopped. Started again. That is genuinely one of the most unhinged things I have ever heard. Something happened in his expression. Layers moving. I've been told. I pulled out the chair at the end of the model table and sat down, because standing suddenly felt optional. The document was still between us, my name printed at the top in clean, neutral type, carrying 14 months of weight I had not consented to. Outside, Seattle was fully committing to the gray now, the bay invisible behind low cloud, the city reduced to wet glass and diffused light. The model tower cast warm shadows across the table. I could smell coffee from somewhere below us in the building, faint and domestic against the cold window air. And underneath it, still quietly persistent, pine resin and banked warmth. I had not topped up my scent blockers since the elevator. I noticed this now. I also noticed that in this particular room with this particular person, the usual low-grade vigilance I carried about my designation had gone somewhat quiet. I did not examine that. After you found my name, I said. What did you do with it? I followed your work, he said. He sat down across from me, which I hadn't expected. The table between us felt suddenly smaller. Papers you published. Projects you filed permits for. I understood within 4 months that you were significantly underplaced at Hanul. I liked Hanul. I know. That was also apparent. Something in his voice softened a fraction. You chose it deliberately. You weren't settling. You were protecting something. I went very still. And you decided to acquire the firm, I said. I decided to acquire the firm because it was a sound business decision with strong regional assets. Pause with real weight in it. And because it would bring you into a position where your actual capability had room to exist. I looked at him across the miniature city between us. Yoon Jihyun, I said, carefully. Do you understand how that sounds? Probably not the way I intend it. It sounds like you restructured a corporate acquisition around one junior architect who asked a good question at a symposium. He said nothing, which was, in its own way, an answer. Tell me it wasn't that, I said. Tell me Hanul was already on your acquisition list and I was a bonus discovery. A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. Hanul was added to the acquisition list 14 months ago, he said. I pressed my fingers flat on the table. Right, I said. Right, okay. The firm has genuine value independent of your presence. Sure, yes, I believe that. I also believe that a man who spent 6 weeks cross-referencing symposium attendees by voice pattern is fully capable of constructing a legitimate business rationale around a decision he made for a completely different reason. I paused. Am I wrong? He looked toward the window, then back toward my general direction. No, he said. You're not wrong. The honesty landed without ceremony. No softening, no deflection. Just the word, placed between us like something he'd been carrying for a while and finally set down. I wanted to be angry. I had the ingredients, the presumption, the rearranged contract, the commute route, the 14 months of quiet surveillance dressed up as professional interest. All the ingredients were present and accounted for. But sitting across from a man who could not see my face and had found me anyway, who had heard 4 sentences in a crowded room and spent 6 weeks making sure they led somewhere real, who had just told the truth when a comfortable deflection was completely available to him, I couldn't locate the anger. And that made me angrier than the anger would have. "What do you want from me?" I asked. Straight. Direct. Not from the architect. From me specifically. He was quiet again. The considered kind of quiet, not the evasive kind. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's not an answer. It's an honest one." I looked at the document with my name on it. 14 months old. A starting point, not a conclusion. A man who collected complete information before making decisions. Sitting across from me admitting that I was the one thing he hadn't fully solved yet. "I need you to understand something," I said. "I am not a project. I am not an acquisition asset. I am not a voice profile or a portfolio or a question you heard in Portland and decided to track down. I kept my voice even and let every word carry exactly the weight I meant it to. I am a person who makes his own choices. And if I stay on this project, if I sign that contract, it is because the work is worth doing and the compensation is fair. Not because you built a 14-month runway to get me here." He listened to all of it without moving. "Understood," he said. "I mean it." "I know," he said. "That's why I told you the truth instead of a better story." I looked at him for a long moment. The rain, the model city, the quiet. "Why can't you recognize faces?" I asked. Not cruel, just direct. He'd been direct with me. Felt like the only fair currency. He didn't flinch. "I've had the condition since childhood. It's neurological. I compensate through voice, posture, spatial pattern recognition, context." A brief pause. "Most people don't notice. I've built systems. Does it bother you?" "It used to." He was quiet for a moment. "It made relationships very difficult. People felt unseen, unrecognized. I stopped pursuing them." The weight of that sentence settled across the room like the rain settling across the bay. Slow, inevitable, cold in a way that had nothing to do with the window glass. "All relationships?" I asked. "Most." He paused. "I find it easier to know people through their work, their thinking, the shape of how they solve problems." Another pause that felt like it was moving toward something. "You solve problems by going to the cause instead of the symptom. You don't take shortcuts even when they're available. And when you're uncomfortable, you go still instead of loud." I realized, with a jolt that I felt somewhere below my sternum, that he had just described me more accurately than most people who had known me for years. "You got that from a portfolio," I said. "And 4 sentences in Portland." Oh, this is a problem." I stood up, picked up the contract amendment, folded it once and held it at my side. "End of week," I said. "The structural proposal and my answer on the contract." "Both." He nodded once. I walked toward the elevator and pressed the button and waited, looking at the doors, feeling his attention on the space I occupied with that precise, unwavering awareness. The elevator arrived. I stepped in, and just before the doors closed, his voice came across the room. "Jiwon SSI." I held the door open with one hand, looked back. "The question you asked in Portland," he said. "The 4 sentences. Do you remember what you said?" I did. Of course I did. I remembered every professional moment that had ever actually mattered. I asked why engineers kept solving for weight when the real variable was time. I said, "Structures don't fail under load. They fail under load over time. The math changes when you change the variable." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said softly. "That's the one." The doors closed. I stood in the elevator as it descended, contract in hand, rain blurring the city outside the small window panel, and felt something I had not felt in a very long time settle into the space behind my ribs. Warmth, Quiet, uninvited, inconvenient warmth. I was in so much trouble. And somewhere above me, on the 16th floor, I had left my scent blocker bottle sitting next to the model tower. I had not noticed until now, which meant for the last 40 minutes in a closed room with no filtered air, he had been breathing me in. The elevator opened on 14 and I walked out with the contract under my arm and the scent blocker situation sitting in my chest like a small, uncomfortable stone. I was not panicking. Panicking was for people who had done something wrong, and I had not done anything wrong. I had simply forgotten a small bottle on a table in a room where I had been ambushed by 14 months of quiet, methodical, pine-scented intention. That was not a personal failure. That was extenuating circumstances. I crossed the floor to my station, sat down, and placed the contract in my bag. Juno was gone. His chair was back at the neighboring station, pushed in neatly, his coffee cup removed. The floor had returned to its working hum. Keyboards, low voices, the occasional soft alert from a monitor. People had very deliberately returned to appearing busy, which told me they had been watching the clock since I left with Yoon Jihyun and were now performing normalcy with significant effort. I opened the third structural report and stared at it. He had been breathing me in for 40 minutes, without scent blockers, in a room with filtered air that had apparently stopped filtering the moment I walked in, because nothing about this day was behaving correctly. I pressed my fingers to the bridge of my nose and took a slow breath. Pine resin, cold stone, warmth. It was still there, on my jacket, faint and deeply inconvenient. Okay, I thought, we are going to be professional about this. I was 3 paragraphs into the third structural report when someone sat down in Juno's vacated chair. Not Juno. This person was taller, broader, with the kind of physical presence that arrived a moment before he did. Alpha, unmistakably, the designation reading in posture and scent before I'd even looked up. Cedar and black pepper, cool and deliberate. He settled into the chair with the comfort of someone who owned every seat he ever occupied, crossed his arms on the edge of my station, and looked at me with open, uncomplicated curiosity. He was objectively very good-looking. Sharp features, easy confidence, the kind of face that knew its own geometry. I looked at him. He looked at me. "You're the 4th one," he said. "I've been told," I said, and returned my eyes to the screen. The other 3 lasted 11 weeks, 6 weeks, and 4 days respectively. A pause with a smile in it. "You've been here 2 hours. Statistically, you're already doing better." "Low bar," I said. "I'll aim higher." He laughed. Short and genuine, surprised out of him. "Baek Kang-yoon," he said. "Senior Structural Consultant. I've been on this project since the foundation permits were filed, and I have watched every single design lead walk in here with complete confidence and walk out quietly defeated." I looked at him again, properly this time. "Baek Kang-yoon, you signed off on the original East Wing load distribution." The smile stayed, but something behind it recalibrated. "I flagged it. I didn't sign off on it." The flag was overruled by the previous design lead who decided the timeline was more important. "The one who quit over it. The one who quit over it," he confirmed, and his voice had lost its lightness and gone somewhere more direct. And then immediately told anyone who would listen that the problem was unsolvable without a full permit reopening, which has been the company line for 3 months. "It's solvable," I said. "I know," he said. "I've known for 3 months. Nobody's been here long enough to listen." I studied him. The directness was real. The frustration underneath it was real. This was not a person performing welcome. This was a person who had been waiting for someone to show up and actually solve the problem he'd been living with. "Pull your original flag report," I said. "The full version, not the summary that went into the official record. I want to see what you actually saw." Something shifted in his expression. Opened, slightly. "You think they summarized it down?" "I think every official document on this project tells a slightly more comfortable version of events than what actually happened, yes." I paused. "I'd like the uncomfortable version." Baek Kang-yoon looked at me for a moment with an expression I could only describe as cautious relief. Then he nodded and reached for his keyboard. For the next hour we worked. It was the good kind of work. The kind that has friction and momentum both, where two people are pulling toward the same point from different angles and the gap between their positions keeps getting smaller. Beck pulled his original flag report, which was, as I suspected, significantly more detailed and significantly more alarming than the version that had made it into the official project record. I pulled the topographic survey data and laid it against his structural calculations. The picture that emerged was not comfortable. The east wing problem had been visible from the initial soil report. Not just visible, documented. Someone had made a decision to proceed anyway, and the paper trail had been carefully arranged to make that decision look like a technical disagreement rather than a deliberate override. "Who made the call?" I said. Came out flat and certain, not quite a question. Beck was quiet for a moment. Cedar and black pepper, steady and considered. The previous project director. He left the company 8 months ago. Comfortable exit package. No formal review. And Yoon Jihyun inherited this. Yoon Jihyun acquired the project 18 months ago as part of a portfolio deal, Beck said carefully. He's been working with incomplete disclosure ever since. The full scope of the East Wing issue was only surfaced to him 6 weeks ago. I sat back. The window behind my monitor held a gray rectangle of Seattle afternoon. Cloud low and rain soft. The bay completely erased now. 18 months ago. The same time frame as a symposium in Portland. The same time frame as a voice and 4 sentences and a search that lasted 6 weeks. He acquired a compromised project. He found a problem he couldn't solve with the team he had. And somewhere in the overlap of those two facts, he heard a question that pointed toward someone who solved problems at the cause instead of the symptom. I didn't say any of that out loud, but the shape of it settled into the room and sat there, quiet and significant. "Can I ask you something?" Beck said, and his voice had shifted into something more careful. "You can ask. How did you end up here? Specifically." He chose the words with deliberate lightness, but the deliberateness itself was a tell. "Hanul's a good firm. Solid work, good reputation. But Chongma is a different scale. The jump makes sense professionally, but the timing is specific," I offered. "Very," he agreed. I looked at him. He looked back, calm and direct and openly curious in a way that wasn't aggressive. Cedar steadiness. A person who asked questions because he wanted accurate information, not leverage. "Yoon Jihyun made me an offer this morning," I said, "on a sidewalk, before I'd agreed to anything or known this job existed." Beck absorbed that. "This morning, 8:23 a.m., give or take. And you came anyway." "I came to see the structural reports," I said. "I haven't decided anything else yet." Beck nodded slowly, then looked at his screen, then back at me. "He doesn't do that," he said. "For context, Yoon Jihyun does not personally recruit. He does not intercept employees on sidewalks. He does not, a pause, apparently know people's commute routes. You know about that. Juno tells me things. We've worked together for 2 years." Beck's expression was measured, professionally neutral with something quieter underneath. "I'm telling you this not to make it strange. I'm telling you because if Yoon Jihyun went to those lengths, there's a reason. And in my experience, his reasons are always sound, even when his methods are unhinged," I suggested. The corner of his mouth pulled. "I was going to say unconventional. I was more accurate." He smiled then properly. "Probably." I turned back to the flag report on my screen. Outside, the rain had softened again to that hovering mist, the city breathing quietly under its gray ceiling. My coffee had gone cold. My scent blocker was still upstairs on a model table. And the contract in my bag had a compensation number on it that I had looked at exactly once and then carefully not looked at again because I wasn't ready to have that particular practical argument with myself yet. "The proposal," I said. "If I model the 3-anchor redistribution against your original flag data, will you co-sign it?" Beck looked at me. Something in his expression settled into something like decision. "Yes," he said. "I've been waiting 3 months to co-sign something that actually solved it." "Good." I opened a new document on my monitor. "Then let's start." We were 40 minutes into the proposal framework when my monitor pinged. An internal message. No sender name displayed, just a user ID I didn't recognize. I opened it. 3 lines. You're not here for the building. Neither is he. Ask him what happened to the Omega who worked here before you. I stared at the screen. Beck was looking at his own monitor, typing steadily, unaware. I closed the message and sat very still. Ask him what happened to the Omega who worked here before you. Before me. As in, there had been another Omega on this floor. Recently enough that someone thought I needed to know about it. Recently enough that the message had been sent within the first 4 hours of my arrival, from an account with no display name, with the kind of brevity that meant whoever sent it knew I would understand the weight without having it explained. You're not here for the building. I thought about 14 months. A date on a document. A symposium in Portland. A man who heard 4 sentences and spent 6 weeks finding where they came from. Neither is he. My pulse was doing something careful and irregular under my ribs. Ask him what happened to the Omega who worked here before you. I looked at Beck. He was still typing, focused, professional, entirely present in the structural problem in front of him. Cedar and black pepper. Steady as he'd been since he sat down. He had been on this project since the beginning. He had watched 3 design leads come and go. He had waited 3 months for someone to listen to his flag report. He knew things. He had to. Beck Kang-yoon, I said. He looked up. Was the previous design lead an Omega? Something moved across his face. Fast, carefully contained, but real. Why do you ask? Because someone thinks I should, I said, and watched his expression do something complicated and quiet. He looked at his screen, then back at me. Her name was, he stopped. His name, he corrected. And the correction was careful enough that I caught the weight inside it. His name was Park Seon-ho. He was here for 11 weeks. He was the first design lead before the other 2. A pause. He left suddenly. No formal notice. His access card was deactivated on a Thursday morning, and by Friday his station had been cleared. That's the one who lasted 11 weeks, I said. Yes. What happened to him? Beck looked at me for a long moment. The floor hummed around us. Rain on glass. Keyboards. The ordinary sounds of a building working. I don't know, he said. And then quieter. But Yoon Jihyun does. My hands were flat on the desk. Steady. Above me, 2 floors up, in a room full of warm model light and the scent of pine and cold stone. A man who couldn't see faces had spent 14 months building a path to get me into this building. And somewhere in those 14 months, another Omega had been here first. And left on a Thursday morning without saying goodbye. What did you do, I thought, and wasn't sure yet who I was asking it of. I sat with that for exactly 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because I watched the clock in the corner of my monitor with the focused attention of someone using numbers to stay calm. For minutes of typing nothing, staring at the proposal framework on my screen without seeing it, while Beck worked quietly beside me with the careful tact of a person who understood that he had just handed someone a lit match and was giving them space to decide what to do with it. Then I closed the proposal document, pushed my chair back, and stood up. Beck looked up. I'll be back, I said. 16th floor? He asked, and his voice carried no judgment. Just the question. 16th floor, I confirmed. He nodded once and looked back at his screen, and I appreciated him enormously for not saying anything else. I crossed the floor, pressed the elevator button, and rode up 2 levels with my arms at my sides and my breathing measured and my thoughts arranged into a single, clean, direct question. What happened to Park Seon-ho? The elevator opened. I walked out. The 16th floor was exactly as I had left it. Warm model light, rain-gray windows, the miniature city glowing amber and patient on the long tables. My scent blocker bottle was still beside the east wing section, small and accusatory. I picked it up and put it in my pocket without using it. Then I looked up. Yoon Jihyun was still here. Or here again, I wasn't certain. He was standing at the far end of the model table, not looking at the model, holding his phone with the screen dark, doing nothing in particular. As if he had been waiting and had arranged himself to look like he wasn't. He oriented toward me when I walked in. That precise, sound-mapped attention. Jiwon SSI, he said. Park Seon-ho, I said. The name landed in the room and stayed there. I watched Yoon's posture shift. Not dramatically, not a flinch. Something structural. The way a building shifts under a load it recognized. He knew why I was here. You found out, he said. Someone told me to ask. I said. So I'm asking. Who was he, what happened to him, and why does the answer feel like something that was deliberately kept out of every document I've been given today? The rain had gone heavy again. Proper rain now, the kind Seattle saved for late afternoon. Full and steady and committed, running in thick rivers down the tall windows and turning the bay into a flat gray mirror below. The model tower cast its warm light upward into the room. All those careful miniature details glowing quietly, indifferent to whatever was about to be said between the two humans standing over it. I moved to the near side of the table and stayed on my feet. I wasn't sitting down for this. Standing felt necessary, not aggressive, just grounded. My own. Jiwon shaped and present. Yoon set his phone on the table. A deliberate gesture, both hands free now, attention fully allocated. He was taking this seriously. I noted it and kept my expression neutral. His scent was doing the thing again. Pine and cold stone and that banked warmth underneath. Steady. Not spiking, not pulling. Just present, the way it had been all day, the way it seemed to exist as a baseline rather than a reaction. My own scent was unblocked and I was aware of it in a room that had now held both of us twice. I stayed focused. Tell me, I said. Park Seon-ho joined the project team 9 months ago, Yoon said. His voice was even. Careful in a different way than usual, not controlled but honest. The kind of careful that comes from wanting to get something right rather than wanting to manage an outcome. He was a structural specialist. Competent. Quiet. He was brought in 6 weeks before the East Wing issue was formally surfaced. Was he an Omega? A pause. Yes. Did you know that when you hired him? Designation isn't listed in our hiring files. It's prohibited under Washington state employment law. That's not what I asked. He was quiet for a moment. I knew. His scent was identifiable. I noticed it. And nothing. It was noted and irrelevant to his employment. I studied the space between us. Then why did he leave on a Thursday morning with no notice? Yoon looked toward the window. It was a rare movement, a shift away from the sound source of the conversation, which meant whatever was coming next cost him something. He didn't leave voluntarily, Yoon said. The room went very quiet under the rain. Explain that, I said, and my voice came out softer than I intended, which meant something beneath my surface had understood the shape of what was coming before my brain caught up. Seon-ho presented a structural solution 6 weeks into the project. A good one, not as complete as what you've outlined today, but directionally correct. He scheduled a presentation with the full project board. Yoon paused. The night before the presentation, someone accessed his project files, removed his original analysis from the server, replaced it with an earlier, incomplete draft. I felt something cold settle in my chest. His presentation failed, Yoon continued. He was presenting work that wasn't his final version, in front of a board that had been given a different document. He didn't know until he was mid-presentation. He looked unprepared, incompetent. The board voted to remove him from the project lead position. A pause. He resigned that same afternoon before the formal removal was processed. The cold in my chest spread. He was set up, I said. Yes. By who? I didn't know at the time. The words came out with the particular weight of something that had been carried. I found out 4 months later, after an internal audit that I initiated when I realized the East Wing solution Seon-ho had proposed. The solution the board had dismissed as incomplete was more sophisticated than anyone on the remaining team could have produced. 4 months later, I said, after he was already gone. Yes. I pressed my fingers flat on the model table. Breathed. Who was it? The previous project director. The one who left 8 months ago with a comfortable exit package. Something in Yoon's voice went very flat and very cold. He had been overriding safety flags and burying competent work to protect a timeline that served his own performance metrics. Seonho threatened that timeline by being correct. And the exit package was a legal settlement in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement. A pause, which I negotiated before I fully understood the scope of what he had done to Seonho specifically. The room held that. I looked at Yoon Jihyun standing across a miniature city with rain flooding the windows behind him and his hands at his sides and his face carrying the specific expression of a person who had done the right thing too late and knew it. "You feel responsible," I said. "I am responsible," he said. "He was on my project, under my acquisition. What happened to him happened on ground I own. You didn't know. I should have known sooner." The words came out without decoration. He deserved better than what he got from this building, and I couldn't fix it for him after the fact. The NDA had already been signed. Reopening it would have exposed him to the legal costs he couldn't afford. A pause. So I made sure he was compensated separately, quietly, through a channel that couldn't be traced back to litigation. I stared at him. "You paid him." I corrected an error. His voice was firm. It wasn't enough. But it was what I could do. The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind. It was the kind that has texture, layered and heavy and full of things that were true but didn't resolve anything neatly. I thought about Park Seonho walking into a presentation with the wrong document on the screen. I thought about what that felt like. Competent work erased, the floor disappearing mid-step, a room full of faces deciding you weren't enough when the real verdict had been rigged before you opened your mouth. I knew the shape of that feeling. Not the same circumstance, but the shape. Being seen as less than you are by people who needed you to be less than you are. I looked at Yoon. "Why didn't you tell me this morning?" I said. "On the sidewalk, when you already knew my name and had the contract ready and had apparently planned the whole encounter. Why not lead with this?" "Because it would have sounded like a justification," he said. "And it isn't. What happened to Seonho doesn't explain why I want you on this project. Those are separate facts." "Are they?" He was quiet. "Did finding out about Seonho change how you thought about what this project needed?" I pressed. "Did it change what you were looking for when you were going through 47 symposium attendee profiles?" The pause stretched. "Yes," he said. "So they're not separate." "No," he admitted. "They're not entirely separate." I let out a slow breath. Not angry, not relieved. Somewhere in between, the emotional equivalent of a building settling, all the load redistributing into a new configuration. "I need you to understand something," I said, and my voice came out quiet and entirely clear. "I am not here to fix what happened to Seonho. I am not a correction. I am not a second attempt or a better outcome or proof that this project can treat an omega right." I held his gaze, or the closest thing to it, facing him, present, unhidden. "If I do this work, it is because the work is real and I am the right person for it. Not because it makes anyone feel better about what happened before." Yoon was still, completely still. "I understand," he said. "Do you? You're not a corrective measure." His voice was quiet and absolutely certain. "You're the person I've been trying to get in front of this problem for 14 months because you are the right mind for it. Everything else," he stopped, started again. "Everything else is mine to carry, not yours." Something cracked open in the room. Not loudly, the way ice cracks in spring, barely audible, structural, the sound of something that had been frozen beginning to shift. I looked at him for a long moment in the warm amber light. He carries things, I thought, quietly, without asking anyone to share the weight. I know that particular habit very well. I picked up my scent blocker bottle from the table, held it, put it back down. Yoon tracked the sound of it setting against the table surface. His attention moved to the space where my hand rested, close to the east wing of the model city, and something in his expression shifted into something open and very carefully restrained. "I'm going to finish the proposal," I said. "Beck and I will have a full structural solution to you by end of week. I'll have an answer on the contract at the same time." He nodded. I turned toward the elevator. Jiwon SSI. I stopped, did not turn around this time, just waited. "The anonymous message," he said, quietly. "The one that told you to ask about Seonho." My pulse ticked. I didn't send it, he said. I want you to know that. I would have told you myself. Eventually, when I had found the right way to say it. I know, I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. I pressed the elevator button. Then who sent it? I asked the closed doors. They opened. I stepped in. And as they closed, I caught it. Faint. From somewhere down the corridor of the 16th floor. A scent. Not pine. Not cedar. Something lighter. Quieter. Familiar in the way things are familiar when you've read about them rather than experienced them. Omega. Someone else was on this floor. Had been here the whole time. Listening. The elevator dropped 2 levels and opened on 14. I stepped out and stood still for exactly 3 seconds, which is how long it took my brain to finish processing what my nose had already understood. The scent from the 16th floor was light, quiet, the kind of Omega scent that had been carefully managed. Not fully blocked, but dampened, shaped into something that blended with the building's filtered air until you were close enough for it to matter. Someone who knew how to be present without being detectable. Someone who had learned that skill the way I had learned it. Out of necessity, out of experience, out of having been in rooms where being detectable carried a cost. I knew that particular education. I crossed the 14th floor toward my station. Beck looked up when I approached, read something in my face, and said nothing, which continued to make him my favorite person in this building. I sat down, opened my monitor. The proposal framework was still there, exactly where I had left it. And in my internal message inbox, there was a second message from the same anonymous user ID. You came back down. Good. I'm in the archive room. End of the East Corridor. Come alone. I read it twice. Then I looked at Beck. Archive room. End of the East Corridor. What's in there? Beck's hands paused over his keyboard. Physical project records. Pre-digital filings. Permit originals. Survey documents going back to the site's first development proposal. A pause. It's not a high-traffic space. Who has access? Anyone with a 14th floor keycard. I looked at my black keycard sitting beside my keyboard. Then I stood up. Still be back, I said. Beck nodded, and this time he did say something. Quiet, aimed at his screen rather than at me. Be careful. The East Corridor was narrower than the main floor, lined with frosted glass panels that diffused the gray afternoon light into something softer and more enclosed. The archive room was the last door on the left, no window, just a keycard panel and a plain handle. I swiped my card. The lock released. I pushed the door open. The room was small and climate-controlled, smelling of paper and cool air and the particular stillness of stored things. Shelving units ran floor to ceiling along 3 walls, packed with labeled binders and document boxes. A single work table sat in the center under overhead lighting that was bright and neutral and made everything look very clear. Standing beside the far shelving unit, holding a document box with both hands, was a person I had not seen before. He was slightly shorter than me, lean, with a careful stillness to his posture that I recognized from the inside. Dark hair, neat, young, mid-20s at most. He was wearing a Chongma holding staff lanyard with an ID I couldn't read from the doorway. His scent reached me as the door closed behind me. That quiet, carefully managed Omega scent. Closer now, the dampening less effective at this range. Underneath the management, something warm and a little tired. The scent of someone who had been on alert for a long time. He looked at me with dark, steady eyes and did not look away. Seo Jiwon SSI, he said. Yes, I said. And you are? Im Tae-woo. He set the document box on the table. I work in the Records and Compliance Division. I've been in this building for 14 months. 14 months. The same 14 months. I pulled out the chair on my side of the table and sat down. Not because I needed to, but because matching his physical level felt like the right grammar for whatever this conversation was. You sent both messages, I said. Yes. You were on the 16th floor. I have access to the model room for document verification purposes. I was filing updated permit records when you and Mr. Yoon were talking. A pause. I didn't intend to overhear. I stayed because I needed to know if you were going to ask him. And if I hadn't, I would have found another way to tell you. His voice was quiet and entirely certain. You needed to know about Seon-ho before you signed anything. The archive room had its own quality of silence. Dense and layered, the way silence gets when it's been undisturbed long enough to settle. The overhead light made everything sharp-edged and factual, no shadows to soften anything. I looked at Im Tae-woo across the work table. He was not frightened. That was the first thing I had clocked and kept returning to. He had the posture of someone who had made a decision and was prepared to stand in it. Quiet endurance, the Korean kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself. He had sent 2 anonymous messages to a stranger on their first day, arranged a private meeting, and was now sitting with the calm of someone who had already calculated the risk and accepted it. This was not a person acting on impulse. How did you know about me? I said. Before today. Mr. Yoon's assistant, he said. Juno SSI mentioned your name 3 weeks ago. Not deliberately, it came up in a logistics conversation about the Hanul acquisition timeline. But he said your name with a particular weight. A pause. People who work closely with Mr. Yoon learn to notice the particular weight he gives to certain things. It transfers. Juno didn't tell you anything specific. No. But I know how to find public professional records. Something moved in his expression. Not pride, more like the quiet acknowledgement of a skill that had been developed for survival. I found your work, and then I understood why your name carried weight. And Seon-ho, I said. You knew him. The room changed. Not visibly, not dramatically, but something in Tae was careful steadiness shifted, deepened, went somewhere more interior, the way water goes dark when it gets deep enough. Yes, he said. I knew him. How? I said, and kept my voice gentle. Not soft, gentle. There was a difference, and this moment knew it. He was my sunbae, Tae-woo said. Senior colleague. We overlapped for 6 weeks before everything happened. He was kind to me when he didn't have to be. This building was new to me and he... A pause, something brief and carefully contained. He made it feel navigable. I said nothing. Let him continue. When he left, nobody explained it to me directly. I was junior staff in a separate division. I heard pieces. I understood enough to know it wasn't right, but I didn't have enough of the picture to do anything with what I knew. His hands were flat on the table. Steady. I've spent 8 months collecting the rest of the picture. I looked at the document box he had set on the table when I walked in. Is that what I think it is? I said. The original East Wing analysis, Tae-woo said. Seon-ho's actual final version. The one that was pulled from the server before his presentation. The air in the room shifted. You have it, I said. He sent it to himself as a personal email attachment the night before the presentation. Standard backup habit. He mentioned it once, offhandedly, as just something he always did with final drafts. Tae-woo pushed the box toward the center of the table. The email account wasn't a Chongma account. It wasn't accessible to whoever cleared his server files. It still exists. I stared at the box. You've had this for 8 months, I said. I've had access to it for 8 months. I've been waiting for the right person to give it to. His dark eyes held mine. Someone who would use it correctly, not as leverage, not as litigation, as what it actually is, proof that the solution existed, that it was sound, and that the person who built it deserved the credit he never received. I felt something move through my chest. Slow and significant. Why not give it to Yoon Jihyun directly? I said. Tae-woo was quiet for a moment. Because I don't know yet whether Mr. Yoon is someone I trust with Seon-ho's name, he said. He compensated Seon-ho quietly. That was right. But quiet compensation and real acknowledgement are different things. A pause. I needed to see how he spoke about Seon-ho when someone asked directly. When there was no board, no legal team, no structured answer prepared. You heard him on the 16th floor, I said. I heard him, Tae-woo confirmed. And he looked at the document box, then at me. He said Seon-ho deserved better. He said it without decoration. He said it like it was a fact he had been living with. A quiet beat. I've been in this building for 14 months, and that is the first time I have heard anyone in a position of authority say Seonho's name like it mattered. The overhead light hummed very softly. I reached across the table and opened the document box. Inside, printed pages, clean and organized, dated and signed. Park Seonho's final structural analysis for the Chongma East Wing. Completed 2 days before his presentation. Complete, elegant, directionally correct in every way that his replacement versions had not been. I read the first page, then the second. By the third, I had stopped breathing carefully and started breathing like someone who had just found the load-bearing wall that explained why the whole structure had been leaning. He solved it, I said. Yes, Taewoo said. Differently than you. But he solved it. This should be on record, I said. His name on this solution. Formally. In the project documentation. That's why I gave it to you. I looked up from the pages. Taewoo was watching me with those dark, steady eyes and the particular expression of someone who has been patient for a very long time and has just arrived at the moment the patience was for. I'll make sure of it, I said, and I meant every syllable with the full weight of my name. Something in his posture released, barely visible, the architectural equivalent of a held breath. There's one more thing, Taewoo said. I waited. The anonymous message system I used to contact you. He paused. It's not a standard Chongma channel. It routes through the compliance reporting system, designed for whistleblower submissions. Untraceable internally. Careful beat. I used it because I didn't know you yet. I needed to be sure you were safe to approach. And now I know you asked Yoon Jihyun directly, in person, without protection or preparation. The ghost of something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to warmth. Anyone who does that on their first day is either reckless or completely sure of themselves. Little of both, I said honestly. This time it was a real expression. Brief and genuine and a little tired around the edges, the way real smiles are when they come from someone who hasn't used them casually in a while. Seonho would have liked you, he said. I closed the document box carefully. Held it. Is he okay? I said. Now, is Seonho okay? Taewoo considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. He's in Boston, he said. He found a position at a smaller firm 6 months after leaving. He's doing good work. A pause. He doesn't talk about this project. But he's not broken. Something in my chest nodded that I hadn't fully realized was nodded. Good, I said. I stood up, document box in hand, and looked at him Taewoo across the work table. Thank you, I said, for waiting for the right person, and for deciding I was close enough. He dipped his head slightly. A small bow. Korean instinct in an American building, quiet and genuine. Don't let them bury correct work again, he said. That's all I'm asking. They won't, I said. Not while I'm here. I walked back down the east corridor with the document box under my arm and something settled and certain moving through me like current through a wire. Beck looked up when I reached my station. His eyes went to the box. His expression went very still, the way expressions go still when they recognize something they had given up on. Is that, he started. Seonho's final analysis, I said. Original version. Dated and signed. I set it on the desk between us. His name goes on the project record. Formally. I'll write it into the proposal myself and I need you to co-sign that section specifically. Beck stared at the box for a moment. When he looked up, something in his face had gone quiet and a little raw in the way things go raw when relief arrives after a long time in the cold. Yes, he said. Simply. Absolutely yes. I sat down and opened my proposal document. Outside, the Seattle rain had finally, after a full day of commitment, begun to ease. The bay was reappearing in pieces through the thinning cloud, gray-green and wide and indifferent and beautiful. The city exhaling. I typed Park Seonho's name into the attribution section of the structural proposal. And then I reached into my bag, took out the contract amendment, unfolded it, and read it properly for the first time. All the way through. Every clause. Every number. Every line. At the bottom, below the compensation structure and the project scope and the standard legal language, There was a single added paragraph that had not been in any standard contract I had ever signed. It read, "The design lead retains full attribution rights to all structural solutions developed during the project period. No work product may be altered, reassigned, or removed from the official record without the explicit written consent of the named architect." I read it twice, then I understood. He had written Seonho's protection into my contract. Not as a correction, not as a legal shield built after the fact, as a structural element. A load-bearing clause placed deliberately the way you place an anchor point, not where it's convenient but where the weight actually falls. He knew, I thought. He knew what had happened and he built the fix into the foundation before I even arrived. My hand was not trembling when I picked up the pen. It was completely steady. Still, I made him wait until end of week. Because I said end of week and I keep my word, and also because Yoon Jihyun needed to understand that I operated on my own timeline. But end of week had never felt so close. It arrived on a Friday morning the way significant things often do, quietly without ceremony, wearing the same gray Seattle sky as every other day that week. I was at my station by 7:15, which was 45 minutes before anyone else on the 14th floor, and I used those 45 minutes the way I used all my best working time. Completely, without interruption, without performance. The proposal was finished. 52 pages. Structural redistribution across 3 anchor points, regrade specifications for the courtyard slope, subsurface channel design for the east perimeter, full material cost breakdown, revised project timeline. 6 weeks of added construction. 0 permit reopening. Every calculation checked twice against Beck's original flag data and once more against the topographic survey I had pulled from the city planning office directly. And on page 4, under the heading Prior Structural Analysis and Attribution, Park Seonho's name. Full. Formal. Dated. His solution documented completely alongside mine, credited as the foundational directional work that the subsequent analysis had built upon. I had written that section first. Everything else had been built around it. I printed the proposal at 7:49, bound it, and set it on my desk. Then I took out the contract amendment, which had been sitting in my bag since Tuesday in a state of being technically unread and practically memorized, and I placed it beside the proposal. Then I made coffee from the floor's communal machine, returned to my station, and waited for 8 o'clock. End of week, I had said. End of week, he had agreed. Some agreements feel like closing arguments. This one had felt, from the moment I said it, like an opening one. At 8:03, Juno appeared at my station with the punctuality of someone who had been waiting since 8 exactly and had given me 3 minutes of professional courtesy. "Mr. Yoon is ready when you are," he said. "Tell him I'll be up in 5 minutes. Juno smiled. Not the assistant's smile, the real one, the one that reached his eyes and suggested he found the whole situation both professionally remarkable and personally delightful. "He said you'd say that. Did he? He also said to tell you the coffee on 16 is better than the floor machine." I looked at my cup, looked at Juno. 5 minutes, I repeated. He laughed quietly on his way to the elevator and I finished my coffee at my own pace, which took 4 minutes because I was Seo Jiwon and I did not rush for anyone, not even men who had spent 14 months building a careful, specific, architecturally precise path to get me into a room with them. Especially not those men. I picked up the proposal, picked up the contract, and went upstairs. The 16th floor looked different on a Friday morning. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn and Seattle had produced, in its place, one of those rare October mornings that felt like an apology for the rest of the month. Low gold light came through the tall windows at an angle, catching the model tower and turning its amber glow warm and actual, less like a miniature and more like a promise. The bay was visible and flat and pewter bright below. The city was clear all the way to the horizon. I stood in the doorway for a moment and let myself notice it. Yoon Jihyun was at the far end of the model table. Standing, not sitting. He was in a different suit than I had seen all week, charcoal, precise, the kind of clothes that looked like they had been selected with the same attention he gave everything else. 2 coffee cups on the table beside him. His phone face down. He oriented toward me when I crossed the threshold, that sound-mapped attention settling into place, and something in the quality of his stillness was different this morning. Still precise, still careful. But underneath the precision, Something that had been very tightly held all week had loosened, fractionally, the way a building settles when the load finally distributes correctly. I crossed the room and set the proposal on the table between us. He didn't reach for it immediately. He waited. I appreciated that more than I expected to. 52 pages, I said. Full structural solution, revised timeline, cost breakdown, material specifications. A pause. And page 4. Page 4, he repeated. Park Seon-ho's attribution. Formal and complete. His analysis is documented as the foundational work. His name is on the solution. I held Yoon's gaze, or the closest thing to it. Present, unhidden, direct. That's not negotiable. It stays in the final project record regardless of what happens with anything else. I know, he said, and then, quietly, thank you. Not for the proposal. I understood that. The thank you was smaller and more specific and much heavier than the proposal. I also found out about the attribution clause in the contract. I said. He was still. The one protecting the design leads right to their own work product. I continued. The one that would have protected Seon-ho if it had existed 9 months ago. I watched his face. You wrote that before I arrived. Yes. That was the right thing to do. It was the minimum correct thing, he said. There's a difference. There it was again. That particular honesty. No inflation, no softening, no reaching for credit he didn't think he had fully earned. Just the accurate assessment, placed down without ceremony. I picked up the contract, uncapped the pen I had carried up from my station, and signed it. The scratch of the pen in the quiet room was very small and very final and very right. I set the signed contract on the table beside the proposal and looked up. Yoon had gone completely still in the way he went still when something landed, not shut down, not closed, but fully interior. Processing at depth. End of week, I said. End of week, he agreed. And his voice had lost every trace of the boardroom register and gone somewhere more honest and more human and considerably more unguarded than anything I had heard from him all week. I picked up one of the coffees from the table. It was good coffee, significantly better than the floor machine. I need you to understand something about how I work, I said. I don't do invisible. I don't do manageable. I don't produce correct solutions and then sit quietly while someone else decides what happens to them. I held the cup in both hands, the warmth grounding. If something goes wrong on this project, I will say so directly and loudly and to whoever needs to hear it. If someone tries to bury correct work, I will be an extremely significant problem for them. And if you and I ever disagree on something structural, I will tell you that you're wrong in complete sentences. I know, he said. You say that a lot. Because you keep telling me things I already understand. Something moved in his expression, that ghost of an almost smile, closer to the surface than it had been all week. I didn't hire you to be manageable, Jiwon SSI. Design lead, I said. You can drop the SSI. The almost smile arrived. Fully. For the first time since a wet Seattle sidewalk on Monday morning. It was objectively an unfair smile. The kind that rearranged the geometry of a room simply by existing in it. I was going to have opinions about that smile for a long time. Jiwon, he said. And my name in his mouth without the honorific sounded like something being handled carefully. Like something he was aware of the weight of. There's something I want to say that isn't about the project. I waited. I am aware, he said, that the way I approached this was not conventional. That's one word for it. I am aware that 14 months, a symposium cross-reference, and a corporate acquisition are not standard relationship building tools. Also accurate. I am aware that you owe me nothing, he continued, and that every choice you've made this week has been entirely your own, and that's the only version of this I wanted. He paused. I want to be clear that I'm not saying this because you signed the contract. The contract is professional. What I'm saying now is separate. I looked at him. The gold morning light came through the windows and caught the model city between us, all those careful miniature details, the east wing finally correctly rendered in my imagination if not yet in physical form. Say it then, I said. I would like to know you, he said. Not the portfolio. not the architect. You. A pause. At whatever pace makes sense. In whatever form you're comfortable with. I'm not asking for anything immediate or defined. I'm asking for the possibility. The room held that. Outside, the bay glittered. The city moved. A ferry crossed the water in the distance. Slow and steady and entirely indifferent to the fact that something significant was happening on the 16th floor of a tower that hadn't been built yet. I thought about 4 sentences in a crowded room in Portland. About 6 weeks and 47 profiles. About a nameplate on a desk and a contract clause that protected the work of someone who was already gone. About a man who carried things quietly and told the truth when a comfortable deflection was available and could not see my face but had found me anyway. About pine resin and cold stone and the warmth underneath that had been present and steady every single day of a week that had rearranged my life without asking permission. I had been invisible my whole life by choice. The plan. The safety net. The coat I wore because it fit and it was mine and it kept things simple. And this man had heard 4 sentences in Portland and spent 14 months making sure that if I ever decided to be visible, there was somewhere worth being seen. I was so tired of the coat. I make my own choices, I said. I know. And I don't do things on anyone else's timeline. I know that too. And if you ever rearrange my professional circumstances without a conversation first again, I will make the East Wing drainage problem look like a minor inconvenience. He nodded seriously. Understood. Good. I picked up my coffee. Then yes. The word landed between us clean and simple and carrying everything. Yoon Jihyun exhaled, barely audible, barely visible, the kind of exhale that happens when something that has been held for a very long time is finally, carefully set down. Yes, he repeated. Don't make it a bigger moment than it is, I said. It's a yes to possibility. Not a yes to a corporate acquisition of my personal life. Noted. I mean it. I know you mean it. The smile again. That unfair, geometry rearranging smile. That's the part I'm most certain about. I shook my head, which was the most I was going to give him on that. We stood on opposite sides of the model city in gold morning light, coffee in hand, the signed contract and the 52-page proposal between us, and the bay bright and wide through the tall windows, and Seattle doing its rare, generous, apologetic best with the October sky. The proposal presentation, I said, returning to structural ground because I was a professional and the work was still real and important and mine. Monday, full project board. I'll present the East Wing solution and the attribution section together. If anyone on that board has a problem with Seonho's name on the record, they can explain that problem to me directly. They won't, Yoon said. Not with you presenting. Correct. I agreed. They won't. He picked up the proposal from the table. Held it with both hands, weight and care, the way you hold something you intend to take seriously. Jiwon, he said, and my name without any honorific was still doing that thing where it sounded like something being handled with awareness of its own weight. For what it's worth, and I understand it may not be worth much given the context of how we arrived here. A pause. You are exactly who I thought you were. In Portland. And every document after. I looked at him. You are exactly who I thought you were. 14 months. A voice. 4 sentences about load and time and the variable that changes everything. The variable isn't weight, I said quietly, and watched something move across his face as he recognized his own framework reflected back at him. It's time. Things don't fail under the right load. They fail under the wrong load over time. I paused. You got the variable right. He was quiet for a moment. So did you, he said. I finished my coffee. Set the cup down beside the model tower, beside the east wing that was going to be fixed, beside the section of miniature city that had been the start of all of this and would, by next year, be a real building with real anchor points and correct drainage and a structural record that told the truth about who had solved it. I picked up my things, crossed toward the elevator. And at the threshold I stopped, because something in me wanted one more moment in that room before it became just a room I worked in, before the morning light moved and the project board meetings started and the professional world resumed its practical, forward-moving shape. I turned around. Yoon Jihyun was standing in the gold light with the proposal in his hands and his attention oriented precisely toward the space I occupied and that steady, pine resin, banked warmth scent that had followed me through every floor of this building all week. He couldn't see my face. He had found me anyway. Monday, I said. 8 a.m. Have the board assembled. They'll be there, he said. Good. I held the elevator door. And Jihyun. His name. First name. No honorific. I watched the shift move through him, subtle, structural, significant. The coffee up here really is better, I said. And I let the doors close on the sound of something that was almost a laugh, quiet and real and entirely unguarded. From a man who had apparently been waiting 14 months to make it. The elevator descended. I stood in it with my signed contract and my finished proposal and the October light coming through the small window panel, watching Seattle rise up gold and clear around the building I was going to fix. I've been invisible my whole life. That was the plan. The safety net. The code I wore. But some mornings the city forgets to cooperate. And some mornings. The ones you don't plan for. On wet sidewalks with burning coffee and a stranger who already knows your name. Being seen turns out to be exactly where you were always supposed to arrive. Like, comment, subscribe and click on the notification bell. Thanks for watching.